It was 11 o'clock on a Friday night when a black Bentley Continental GT rolled silently into the gravel lot of a small repair shop on the outskirts of Denver. The woman who stepped out wore a navy blazer, her hair pinned without a single strand out of place, as if she had just walked out of a boardroom rather than running from her own unraveling life. She slid the key onto the counter and said exactly one sentence, "Fix it, I will be back." Then she stepped into a waiting car, disappearing into the dark night without giving a name, without a phone number, without a work order. Mason Cole stood alone under the harsh fluorescent lights, looking at the key, then the car. A faint trace of hydraulic fluid had sprayed in a thin crescent right beneath the rear axle. Too deliberate, too precise to be normal wear. In 15 years of reading broken machines, he had learned to tell the difference between what simply fails and what is made to fail. The woman was Giselle Hartman, the car was meant to kill her, and someone had planned it for a very long time. Mason was 38 years old, preferring a life where people did not ask him any questions. His shop, Cole's Auto, sat at the far end of a county road, wedged between a tire warehouse and a closed diner. It was the kind of place that made you assume the work was slow and bills were negotiated in cash. They were wrong on both counts. The inside of the shop was surgically clean. Tools hung in precise order of use along the left wall. Wrenches were graduated by size, like a series of arguments arranged from least to most serious. Folded face down on the corner of his work table was an old credential frame he had stopped looking at years ago. Beside it sat a coffee mug that had gone cold at 7 p.m. he had not even noticed. When the luxury Bentley rolled in, Mason did not rush over with any real urgency. He wiped his hands, walked over, and circled it the way a man inspects something he already suspects. The exterior was immaculate, without a single stone chip or scuff along the rocker panels. Whoever owned this machine had it detailed regularly, drove it carefully, and expected it to perform without any question. He crouched at the rear, aiming his flashlight at a low angle beneath the undercarriage. The crescent of fluid he had spotted from across the lot was exactly where he expected it. He touched the wet stain with his fingertip. Fresh hydraulic brake fluid, lighter than oil, with that chemical smell most people mistake for engine coolant. He stood up and unlatched the heavy hood. He worked for 3 hours without ever stopping, moving through the car in a sequence that was not that of a mechanic fixing a problem, but the deliberate sequence of an investigator reading a scene. He checked the obvious parts first, then the hidden ones, then the details requiring a different kind of attention. The kind of focus born from having spent a decade reconstructing massive highway crashes that turned out not to be accidents at all. By the time he reached the rear brake circuit, he had already found absolutely nothing wrong with the engine, the transmission fluid, the cooling system, or the complex electrical harness. This vehicle was in immaculate condition everywhere, except for one crucial place. The rear brake line had been scored, not cut but scored. A single groove etched beneath, done so carefully that the protective sleeve looked completely untouched, a dark truth waiting to be found. The groove was cut at an angle designed to weaken the line without snapping it right away, just enough to hold under normal driving pressure, through a garage, parking lots, and city streets, only to fail completely at highway speeds when the pedal would sink to the floor. Mason snapped photos of it from 4 different angles. He set the phone on the hood and stood still, staring up at the dark ceiling. He had seen this precise method before, not in textbooks but in case files. With slow, methodical patience, he continued inspecting the rest of the vehicle. Not because he actually expected to find more sabotage, but because ignoring even a single part went against years of his strict training. But as we looked closer, behind the trunk panel trim he uncovered a second secret. A hidden custom compartment built by someone who clearly knew exactly what they were doing. Inside lay a flash drive and a sealed envelope. The writing on the paper was neat yet clearly rushed. The mark of someone calm enough to write clearly, but moving too fast to press the pen down hard. Just 4 words: "If I don't return, Logan Burke." Mason stared at the message, then slipped both the envelope and the drive into his pocket. He walked over to the end of his bench and pulled out his private phone. Logan Burke, a name he had not uttered out loud in 4 years. Earlier that afternoon, up on the 32nd floor of a glass tower in Denver, Giselle Hartman had been sitting at the balcony, head of a long conference table, enduring a presentation she knew was entirely false. Her family business was worth $2.3 billion. Her father had built the company from a local distributor into one of the largest automotive holding groups in the entire region. And when he died 18 months ago of a sudden stroke at his desk, the board watched Giselle step into that office with a heavy skepticism they did not even try to hide. She spent those 18 months proving them wrong with the quiet patience of someone who knew that shouting the truth is no better than lying. But she had not prepared for Adrian Voss. The 51-year-old chief financial officer was silver-haired and wore the smug grin of a man who believed rules were only made for those less clever than him. He had served her father for 9 full years. He even delivered the eulogy at the funeral. Yet for 4 months, he had been quietly stripping away her power to run her own company. He rerouted financial approvals to committees she did not control, cutting her out of communications she should have started, while secretly building a board coalition with enough votes to call for a vote of no confidence in just 9 days. Giselle was fully aware. She spent nights alone documenting it at 2 in the morning, using a secret account built from the credentials of a former IT contractor who had walked away 6 months ago. But what you and I know now is that someone had also made a move on her car. She was returning from a site visit when her brake pedal suddenly went soft. The pedal hadn't fully failed, but it sank just a centimeter deeper than normal. A subtle softness that almost any normal driver would miss. But Giselle was far from ordinary. Her father taught her to drive in an Albuquerque parking lot at 12 years old. And his very first lesson was that a vehicle always tells you its next move before it happens. Sensing trouble, she exited at the next ramp and pulled onto a side street. Then she searched her phone maps for the nearest independent mechanic. No big dealerships or national chains, nothing a powerful corporation could easily influence. Cole's Auto popped up 3 miles east. Keeping to the right lane, she drove slowly, staying under 40 miles an hour. She had packed the envelope in the USB drive 2 weeks ago, the exact night she quietly downloaded those secret financial files. She realized, as we now know, that things had moved past simple corporate politics into something that had no name in company policy handbooks. Let's look closely at the name she wrote down, one found in an old case file, hidden deep in a database of government safety investigations from 4 years before. A veteran accident investigator who had discovered a terrifying pattern of sabotage in major car crashes before his case files were quietly buried and he was forced to resign. Back then, she saved his name on a hunch. But the night she sealed the evidence, the truth became entirely clear. She still wasn't completely sure this shop actually belonged to him. She really wasn't sure of anything anymore, but this shop was just 3 miles off the highway, totally independent, and the business license matched his name. It was really the only choice left to her. A plan built during 2 secret weeks spent completely beyond the reach of Adrian Voss. The next morning at 7:15, Mason called Logan Burke and spoke before Logan could say a word. "I have something of yours." A tense silence followed. Then Logan simply asked, "Where are you?" 40 minutes later, he pulled up in a gray pickup with a cracked side mirror, looking pretty much the same as Mason remembered. He was broad-shouldered and extremely guarded with his expressions. He was the kind of man who listened to what you said, matching the caution he used when scanning a busy street before crossing. At 41, Logan had spent 10 years working homicides in Denver before shifting to more lucrative private detective work. It paid much better and required less paperwork. He and Mason first crossed paths on a case 7 years ago when a wrecked delivery truck turned out to be no accident. They stayed in touch off and on, until eventually they didn't. Without saying a word, Mason spread the photographs across the dusty workbench. Logan studied them in silence, holding a couple up to catch the overhead light. He didn't ask what they were, he just muttered, "This was done on purpose." Mason explained it was done with a professional tool, likely a carbide-tipped scribe, by an expert who knew hydraulics well enough to trigger the failure after a set number of highway miles. Logan looked up. Mason said, 80 to 120 miles at speed. It would have looked like a standard brake failure. Could have been anything. Where? Thermal fatigue, Logan said. But it wasn't, Mason replied. No. He told Logan about the envelope, the USB drive, and the name written clearly on the front. Logan went quiet, his mind clearly racing to put the pieces of this puzzle together. Then he spoke. She left your name because of your history with the NTSB. It wasn't a question. Mason simply nodded. He had spent 11 years investigating crashes as a senior engineer with the National Transportation Safety Board, before resigning 4 years ago when an investigation was blocked from above. A string of suspicious accidents involving corporate vehicles owned by holding companies that all shared a single hidden financial parent, as Mason had documented. That critical evidence went nowhere. They shut down the case for bureaucratic reasons that we know were just a cover-up. So he quit, packing his bags and driving to Denver. He opened a garage because his real talent was understanding the truth behind broken machines. And frankly, he hadn't figured out how to walk away from that calling. Logan asked if they had opened the USB. Mason shook his head. He had only taken photos of the envelope and the drive. He carefully logged the chain of custody on his phone at 3 in the morning, keeping the physical evidence sealed. Logan stared at him. Mason simply replied, "Those items belong to her." Logan warned, "We can't get to her without alerting the company first." "I know," Mason said. They both understood the danger of that move. Every line of communication into the Hartman Automotive Group ran through a corporate network that Adrian Voss had spent months tightening his grip around. Any call to their executive office would be flagged, tracked, and intercepted. They had to wait for Giselle Hartman to return on her own. She walked in that afternoon at 2:30, wearing jeans and a leather jacket. Her hair was down, trying to project a casual vibe, like someone who dressed to be completely invisible and wasn't quite managing it. And she wasn't alone. Beside her was a sharp, observant younger woman whom Mason recognized as private staff before a word was spoken. He had verified Giselle's identity the night before, matching her face to a photo from a 3-year-old business journal. He kept that quiet over the phone, simply telling Logan to be at the shop by noon. Logan was waiting in the back when both women stepped inside. Giselle glanced at her Bentley on the lift, then turned her gaze to Mason. She announced she was there to collect her vehicle. Mason told her the car wasn't ready. She insisted she only wanted a basic inspection, not repairs, and would take it right now as is. Mason shook his head. That was not going to be possible. He slid his phone forward, showing the photos of her cut brake line on the screen. He said, "Your rear hydraulic line was sliced with a precision tool. If you had driven this at highway speeds for another 60 to 80 miles, your rear brakes would have failed completely at the worst possible moment. You wouldn't have had any time to react." He spoke without emotion, like a man stating a simple measurement rather than delivering terrifying news. Giselle stared at those photos, searching for the truth. Beside her, Charlotte Reed leaned in and went completely pale. Looking up at Mason, Giselle showed no fear, an observation he quietly noted. Instead, she was calculating, a trait he recognized. She demanded to know how he decoded the scoring method. Holding her gaze, he reached under the counter to pull out the envelope and the flash drive, laying the evidence right between them. He said, "I didn't open either of them, they're yours." As Giselle stared at the envelope, a subtle shift passed over her face. It wasn't relief or sorrow, but an unspoken emotion somewhere in between. Clutching the envelope with both hands, she quietly asked Mason who he really was. He gave his name, but she snapped back, "That's not what I asked." And he understood then. She already knew the truth before she ever left her car in his lot. Logan stepped out of the back office, and the four gathered in the garage. Perched on folding chairs, a stool, and a workbench. Together, they watched Giselle empty the envelope across the clean surface of the work table. The papers inside were plain and unassuming. A scanned contract transferring $40 million in corporate assets to an unknown holding company. It carried her forged signature in a style she had never used. The details aligned a series of internal emails between Adrian Voss and Xavier Holt, the company's own general counsel. They were discussing the timeline for what they called the leadership transition. It was written with the arrogant confidence of people who believed no one would ever read their private words. The flash drive contained the stolen financial data, balance sheets, bank wire records, and vendor approvals. Each fragment was a piece of a larger truth waiting to be uncovered. A massive ongoing embezzlement scheme routing company, cash through shell corporation Giselle never knew existed. Logan studied the wire transfer records in silence for a long time. He muttered that the numbers matched exactly what was required to fund a hostile takeover. Not the takeover of some competitor, but of her own company. If they managed to oust Giselle and bring criminal charges, while destroying her public reputation in the process, the stock price of Hartman Automotive Group would crash to a level where a buyer could easily acquire a controlling share during the panic before the market could stabilize. He asked if she knew of any outside buyer who had shown interest over the past year. She recalled a very quiet, unofficial approach. 9 months ago, through a middleman she had refused to meet. She never uncovered who was pulling the strings, assuming it was just opportunistic. Logan jotted down a note and replied it wasn't. Meanwhile, Mason kept studying the flash drive. He pressed her for details on how she copied the files, which account, what login, and the exact timestamp. She explained she used a temporary contractor account she had activated using her own admin override at 2:17 a.m. from her home laptop on the company VPN. Mason set the drive down and warned her. That chain of custody won't hold up in court. The data grab was unauthorized, no matter if you own the company or not. You see, a clever defense lawyer would have that thrown out immediately. Giselle knew that. She built it to protect herself, not to prove the truth. She looked at Mason. But you said you knew how to make it work. He hadn't said those exact words. But he had left the door open, and she stepped through with a precision that showed him exactly how her mind worked. He turned around and walked over to the dark corner of his workbench. A framed credential had been lying there, face down, for 4 years. He picked the frame up, propped it upright against the wall, and then carried it over to the table. National Transportation Safety Board, Senior Forensic Engineer. The certification was still valid. He had renewed it every 2 years out of a habit he was never quite willing to look at closely. He said, a forensic examination of the car under federal standards, complete with photo evidence. Independent third-party verification. Plus a signed chain of custody starting from when the car arrived here. That makes it admissible. That is your foundation. He set the frame down. The financial records are secondary. What I can give you is the physical evidence. The rest is up to who Logan can contact, but Logan was already dialing his phone. They worked through the night. Mason went back to the Bentley to begin the official investigation. These were not the casual notes he took the night before. This was the official forensic record needed to stand up in court. Every single photo was timestamped, every measurement logged with its exact calibration date. Every hidden truth cross-referenced with official bulletins to prove the car was deliberately sabotaged. He spent 2 hours working underneath the lift. Then he scanned the engine bay and moved inside the cabin. Finally, he returned to the brake line, capturing more photos under completely different light. By 1 in the morning, he had 47 photos and a 14-page report, along with a statement from a former colleague in Salt Lake City who reviewed the photos. He instantly recognized the tool marks and agreed to send over a notarized statement by morning. Across the garage, Giselle was hunched over a borrowed laptop, piecing together the money trail without using those locked files, sticking strictly to documents she got through official channels. Simple emails still sitting in her sent box. Official minutes shared with the board, alongside calendar records putting Adrian Voss and Xavier Holt in very specific places at exact times that matched the creation of the fraudulent transfer papers. Charlotte, who was told to switch off her phone after Mason noticed she got 3 calls from a number labeled as corporate IT support after 9 in the evening, sat right next to her, reconstructing everything from memory, writing down every company message she sent or saw over the last 60 days. Sometime deep in the night, with Charlotte asleep on the office couch and Logan outside making cold calls in the dark, Mason poured 2 fresh cups of coffee and slid one right next to Giselle in silence. She took a sip without looking up. A long silence stretched between them. She looked at him. You left because of a case they tried to bury, didn't you? He confirmed it. I found a mention of that company you investigated tucked away in a regulatory filing, she said. That's how I found your name. He admitted he figured it was something like that. She asked if he regretted leaving. He paused, weighing the raw truth of it before answering. He said, I got the right answer on that case. But I couldn't find anyone willing to face it. He took a sip of his coffee. Out here, I do the work without a boss deciding what the truth is worth. She sat in silence for a moment. Then she asked, the company they protected back then, do you think it connects to this? Mason looked up at his old credential frame, sitting dusty above the workbench. He admitted that exact question had kept him awake since 1 in the morning. But he stopped there. In our search for truth, you never speak without absolute proof. That was a lesson he learned long ago. Naming a hidden secret too early is the fastest way to make it disappear forever. Logan returned at 2:45 with news. He had reached out to a contact at the Denver FBI office. No official filings, no formal complaints, just a quiet off-the-record conversation. His contact revealed that Adrian Voss was already flagged in connection with a certain inquiry. A securities investigation opened 6 weeks ago, stalled because no primary complainant had stepped forward. Logan's call wasn't the very first threat. It was the clue that finally made the pattern visible. Now they needed the documentation. Logan confirmed they had it. The contact told him to bring it tomorrow morning. But that night, Charlotte discovered a hidden tracking application on her phone. A piece of corporate spyware. Secretly pushed to her device through the company's remote management system. An active link she forgot to disable when she abandoned her company phone. She alerted Mason at 6 in the morning. He examined the connection logs, mapping out the timeline of the leak. The hours their location had been actively broadcasted. Giselle tensed at the news, but she refused to panic. How much time do we have? She asked. Mason replied, enough if we move now. He spoke calmly, knowing that panic is useless when a crisis demands absolute focus. This level of pressure had a way of stripping away everything that didn't matter. Xavier Holt pulled up to Cole's auto at 8:47 that morning. He didn't come alone. 2 unfamiliar men walked in behind him. Both wore that generic casual attire meant to blend in, which only made them stand out. Xavier was a tall man wearing round glasses, speaking with the deliberate calm of someone who had spent 30 years. Knowing that words were simply another weapon to control a room. He announced there was an urgent corporate matter requiring Giselle's presence back at head office. His polite tone carried the chilling certainty of a man who knew she had no choice. He spared Mason only a single brief glance. The way you look at a piece of rearranged furniture. Mason slowly set down the heavy wrench. He wiped his grease-stained hands on a shop rag. Mason walked to the center of his garage, speaking with the same flat tone he used to diagnose a bad carburetor. You're standing in my place of business, he said. I completed a forensic examination of the vehicle on this lift at 6:45 this morning. The report went to the FBI field office in Denver at 6:50. Another copy was filed with the NTSB regional office, officially reporting suspected deliberate mechanical interference under federal statute. Mason looked straight at Xavier, his voice perfectly calm. The physical evidence is logged, photographed, and signed. And verified by 3 other people, not me. You can hang around, but I'd think twice about why you came here. Xavier stared at him in silence before shifting his gaze to Giselle. Then his eyes found Charlotte. He muttered to no one in particular, this is a private matter. Mason cut in. It stopped being private when someone cut a notch in a brake line. Xavier adjusted his glasses while the 2 heavy guys behind him shifted their weight. With that, Xavier Holt, the top lawyer for the Hartman Automotive Group, turned around and walked back out of the open bay door. His 2 guards followed closely. They piled into a car and sped off without saying another word. Giselle turned to Mason and asked, did you really send that report at 6:50? He grabbed his wrench again and walked back over to his workbench. I did, he replied. Just 48 hours later, the board of directors of the Hartman Automotive Group called a sudden emergency session in a room high up on the 32nd floor of the downtown tower. The entire meeting was orchestrated by Adrian Voss, who scrambled in under 24 hours to gather enough signatures to force an immediate vote of no confidence. He cited deep concerns over leadership stability and corporate fiduciary duty. 6 of the 11 board members had already been privately briefed by Adrian and Xavier over the preceding days. They had traded those votes with the slick, calculated precision of conspirators who had been plotting this exact coup for months. Giselle walked inside completely alone. Charlotte was waiting in the building but stayed outside. Meanwhile, Mason and Logan waited down in the lobby, Logan clutching a phone that buzzed with fresh FBI updates every 15 minutes. Giselle placed her laptop on the polished table, sat back, and watched the remaining members file in. Adrian slipped in last, taking his sweet time before sitting at the head of the table. He carried the smug confidence of someone who knew the game was already rigged. The meeting kicked off with boring procedural formalities that absolutely nobody cared about. Then Adrian slid his evidence forward, the forged transfer papers, bound and ready. Every board member got a copy printed on watermarked premium cream paper. He laid out the fake timeline, his voice dripping with mock worry and concern. Playing the part of a reluctant savior, shielding the company from a close friend who betrayed him. A few board members nodded, and one asked for minor details. You and I can feel the scripted nature of the room. This was a highly rehearsed play. Once Adrian wrapped up, he turned to Giselle, giving her the floor with a fake smile, knowing nothing she said could change the outcome. Giselle opened her laptop. She promised to share 3 things, assuring them it wouldn't take long. First up, a 14-page forensic report. It met federal standards, proving deliberate sabotage. Someone had cut the brake lines on her luxury car, a vehicle last serviced at an authorized dealership 11 days ago. The analysis was signed by a certified federal safety investigator, and the formal file was already sitting with the Denver FBI. She flashed the official federal receipt on the screen. Around the table, board members shifted uncomfortably. The second reveal was a chain of internal emails between Voss and Holt, fully verified by server metadata. The messages outlined the cold mechanics of what they called their leadership transition. 3 dated message threads popped up on the monitor, every word traced directly to their personal digital signatures. She kept quiet, forcing the board to read the truth in silence. The air grew heavy, with that deep silence that falls when secrets are exposed. They were suddenly questioning everything they thought they knew. The final blow was an official receipt from the Securities and Exchange Commission. It was stamped early that morning, confirming their case. A formal complaint detailing insider fraud and hidden conflicts, all tied directly to the hostile takeover of Hartman Automotive. The federal probe was active. An official case number existed. Adrian Voss stood up. He spoke in that smooth, calculated register of an executive who knows exactly how to manipulate his way out of trouble. He dismissed the vehicle crash report, claiming it was drafted by an engineer with 0 federal authority. He insisted their leaked messages were completely out of context. He labeled the federal filing a desperate harassment tactic by an enemy. He sounded perfectly polished, but he only got 3 sentences deep before the conference room door swung open. Logan Burke stepped inside, accompanied by a woman arranged through an NTSB contact. She was an active FBI agent holding a federal subpoena, ordering Xavier Holt to appear immediately as a witness in an active fraud investigation. Without saying a word, Xavier Holt stood up and walked straight out of the room with her, ignoring everyone. Adrian froze mid-sentence. Absolute silence returned. He stood there, hands flat on the table, staring at Giselle with a face stripped of all corporate theater. The polite mask, the calculation, the smug smile. He was left with nothing but raw, genuine curiosity. He leaned in and whispered, "Where did you find him?" Giselle simply shut her laptop and kept completely quiet. The silence spoke for her. The board called for a vote. 4 voted to remove her, while 7 voted to keep her. Giselle Hartman was still the undisputed leader of the automotive empire. The board adjourned at exactly 2:17 in the afternoon. Over the following days, they realized that what was forgotten was never the car, but a truth waiting to be found. Within a week, Adrian Voss and Xavier Holt were officially indicted. 9 counts of wire fraud and market manipulation exposed their secrets. They were also charged with conspiracy and filing fake corporate documents. The shady investment fund, whose entire strategy relied on removing Giselle, now faced a massive separate investigation launched by the FBI. Agents warned this deep probe would stretch far beyond Denver. Seeking the truth, the board rebuilt its committee under strict oversight. They authorized an exhaustive forensic audit of every single transaction, run through the CFO's office over the past 24 months. Charlotte Reed received a clean phone, her corporate access fully restored, along with a personal, written apology hand-delivered by the chairman. She quietly accepted it, choosing to simply return to her desk. Logan Burke billed for his consulting services and returned to business. But before Logan left the repair shop that critical afternoon, he pulled Mason aside to reveal a startling connection. A subsidiary of the fund matched 3 of the secret files from that old investigation Mason was forcibly stopped from solving 4 years ago. He mentioned that their trusted contact at the FBI was already investigating. Mason was warned a phone call was coming. He simply nodded, expecting nothing less. Logan asked if it changed anything. Mason took a long moment to reflect. Probably, he muttered, which was the closest to a yes Logan had ever gotten. A week after the board meeting, on a crisp early autumn Tuesday afternoon, when the fading sunlight poured at a sharp angle through the open bay doors of Cole's Auto, that gorgeous black Bentley Continental GT quietly rolled back into the yard. Mason, working beneath another car, heard tires on the gravel. He recognized its heavy weight instantly, even before looking. He slid out from under the car lift, stood up, and wiped his greasy hands. The Bentley was finally ready. He had completed the repair right after the meeting, thoroughly testing every single component. The cut brake line was replaced, the hydraulic system fully bled and pressure tested. He left it in the lot with the keys on the hood, calling no one. Giselle stepped out. She wore a long dark coat, her hair flowing loose. She stood in silence, staring at the sleek machine like someone reunited with a truth she feared was lost forever. Then she stepped inside the shop. Mason stood at his workbench, his back turned. Calling his name softly, she waited for him to turn, then placed 2 envelopes on the table. The first held his payment, covering the forensic work, the thorough repairs, and the safety certification. The check was written for the high value she truly believed his work deserved. It was far more than he ever would have charged. The second envelope held an official letter on Hartman Automotive Group letterhead, offering him an exclusive long-term consulting role. It outlined a safety audit program for the company's entire vehicle fleet. A private retainer reporting straight to the CEO. This kept him entirely independent, completely free from the messy politics of the corporate ladder. He stared at the envelopes, but didn't pick them up. He quietly asked why she wanted him instead of a major firm. She replied, because a major firm answers to a parent company and a managing. Behind the corporate shield lay partners, insurers, and 3 warning signs telling them never to cross that line. He picked up the second envelope, turning it over slowly, looking for the truth hidden inside. He muttered, "Let me think about it." She simply replied, "I know." She was already turning back toward her luxury car. He stood in the wide doorway of the bay, watching her pull onto the county road and drive east until she was gone. The repair shop fell silent again, save for the familiar low hum of the air compressor. Just the dry scent of clean concrete and afternoon light shifting across the tools on the wall. Then his phone rang. "Logan," he answered. Logan spoke quickly. "That thing I told you about the fund subsidiary, the FBI wants a formal interview. They want it next week in Washington. They are treating that 4-year-old case as an active open file." Silence hung on the line. "Are you willing to go?" Mason stared at his workbench. We see his credential frame resting against the wall, untouched since the mystery began. The night Giselle Hartman walked out of his shop with a key, a plan, and secrets yet to be uncovered. He looked down at his hands, then back at the frame. He muttered, "Send me the address."